Okay, so we've got one more session today. It's a fireside chat. We're gonna chill things out a little bit. The chat's on data management strategy and early stage R&D. So effective data management plays a pivotal role in the pharmaceutical industry, as you all know. And pharma companies often grapple with the intricate task of handling large volumes of multimodal data, all while ensuring accuracy, security, and compliance. So mastering this art of complex data management is critical to unlocking the full potential of all of our research efforts. So in this conversation, our guest speakers and Nichelle, our moderator, is going to cover effectively managing multimodal, multi-source data, including data from CROs, patient data, and in-house generated data or proprietary data. The costs that are incurred without the right data infrastructure, so technical debt would be the term I would use to describe that, as well as address how do you handle data downtime, curation costs, and cloud solutions. So joining us now, we've got our two guest speakers, Zitong Li, who's the CTO of NextGen Jane, and Christopher Plessia, who's the Director of Clinical Biomarkers at HOOKIPA Pharma. We're very happy to have both NextGen Jane and HOOKIPA as customers who are currently leveraging Elucidate's data management platform. And moderating this session will be our very own Director of Technical Sales and Solutions, Dr. Nichelle Fernandez. Nichelle works very closely with me, so I'm really happy to have her here monitoring this session. So with that, I will pass it off to you, Nichelle.
Thank you, Maya. Welcome, everybody, to the Fireside Chat. And we're really delighted to have, like Maya said, Zitong and Chris with us today to share some of their insights into the complexities of data management within their respective organizations. I'd like to do a quick bio for our panelists. Zitong is a veteran in building and leading bioinformatics teams for cancer and reproductive health diagnostics at several biotech companies, including Genomics Health, Illumina, and NextGen Jane, where he's currently the CTO. He's majored in biophysics at Fudan University and has a PhD in biology from the University of Rochester. So welcome, Zitong. Chris is a translation medicine expert with several years of experience in oncology and immuno-oncology drug development. He's also worked at several biotech companies, including Synlogic, Rubius, Nimbus, and HOOKIPA Pharma, where he currently is the Director of Clinical Biomarkers. And Chris has a PhD in biology from Mount Sinai School of Medicine. So again, welcome, Chris and Zitong. And I'm very excited to gain some of these insights from the two of you. I know you both bring very different perspectives and are currently work with organizations that are in different phases of their growth. So, hoping that the audience and the and the audience here today will really get some really cool insights into how your organizations are managing their data. So let me start with a question for both the panelists. We can start with Zitong and then Chris, if you want to take the same question. Can you elaborate on the different data types and sources of data that you have to deal with in your organizations, and maybe touch upon some of the key challenges that you have with both managing this data and utilizing this data?
Thank you, Nisha, and thank you, everyone. I'm very glad to join this. And so regarding the question is basically, especially for the company I'm working right now, NextGen Jane, which is a diagnostic company for women's health. And specifically, we're using RNA-seq sequencing technology to try to develop the diagnostics tests for women's health. So because of this, is actually we have a very two diverse extreme type of data. On the RNA-seq side is a very large data, which I would call it also much in depth. So it's a very large depth of data. Needs large, very high power computing infrastructure to tease out all the RNA-seq data and map to the gene. Then we find the biomarker discovery, which is a typical sequencing-based biomarker discovery things. On another end, since we are a women's health company and specifically we are dealing with the disease we are trying to target on is endometriosis, which is a very complex and less well understood at molecular and cellular level for this disease. So we have lots of new clinical information associated with it. That's also for us, we demand quite broad, which is a very large breadth type of data for it. So we have both type of data and we need to integrate both of them. So for this type of challenge is especially for the RNA-seq type, actually we worked with the elucidator to find the solution for it. So yeah, that's basically what we are now.
Thank you. And Chris, do you want to add your thoughts on the types of data that you're dealing with at HOOKIPA?
Sure. Thanks for having me. We deal with, so we're a phase 1-2 immuno-oncology company, and really all of our data processing challenges revolve around trying to understand what's going on with individual patient sets and varied assays. So, instead of working with one specific modality, we actually have many, many types of data we're working with. So immunofluorescence, ELISpot, sequencing, flow cytometry, cytokines. So really being able to integrate all of that data and visualize it in a way that's meaningful and can provide some insight as to what patient populations are responding, how the different types of data inform decisions about dosing or combination therapies. So I think the challenge is really taking the patient metadata and being able to, so that would be their response, of course, to the drug, as well as age, sex, previous medical history, previous treatments, and being able to really hone in on the types of patients that are likely to respond to a drug for future stratification or the way that we present data for futility testing. So I think our challenge is unique insofar as that we really need to be able to integrate many different types of data and understand how different patients who might respond in a certain way to the drug and have a different profile in one type of assay, and those specific patients, how they respond in all the other assays. So the important thing is being able to, without manual input all the time, being able to understand what's going on with these different populations, how they're responding to our therapy.
Okay. Thank you so much. So what I heard, from both Zitong and you were, both the organizations are really managing diverse data types. I think Zitong mentioned some of the processing challenges because of the amount of data and also the depth of sequencing and the challenges with NGS data that he's dealing with. Whereas, Chris, if I understand you correctly, some of the challenges that you have are really various modality data from different, bioassays that you're trying to integrate and potentially surface those insights. I was wondering, what are some of the, you both have certain unique challenges. Maybe you can speak about some of the infrastructure or the tools and or resources that, HOOKIPA as well as, NextGen Jane are using to resolve some of these key challenges. Maybe, Chris, if you want to start, and Zitong, you can follow.
Sure. Yeah, I've worked at, as you mentioned, I worked at a variety of different small pharma companies, and this is always challenging because at smaller companies, you have a limited number of members of all the different teams that are handling enormous data sets for many different patients and often multiple clinical trials. So, I've seen data management implemented in a lot of flawed ways at different companies. So there's always an intention of integrating all of the data and having a centralized database for all of your raw data and a means of visualizing this data in a way that not just myself as a biomarker person, but I can quickly plot this data for investors or potential partners. And this has always been a real challenge, and at previous companies, it's not something that's been realized into any sort of useful form. Normally, it's kind of it's a dream that you hope you'll be able to accomplish, but it's not something I've ever seen come to fruition. Working with Elucidata, my goal was to hopefully be able to integrate all this data and have things centralized in such a way that people who aren't necessarily biomarker experts can access the data and try to make meaningful conclusions. Like instead of the workflow being my CSO through an executive director to myself, that we could streamline that process. And beyond that, just being able to get more insights, to not have these clunky, a lot of times things are on a shared drive with many different folders, many different names of raw data sets and analyzed data. It's very difficult for document control. So my goal with Elucidata was really to overcome these challenges at an earlier stage and be able to really integrate the different workflows into something more centralized.
And I had a follow-up question to that. And how do you actually, how do you get more acceptance or, bring folks together around a specific tool or infrastructure that you're actually putting in place? What would you say really helped?
It's always, budget is always an issue at a smaller company. You do have to justify your decisions as far as data management and putting the, it is a spend that you have to come to management and tell you what the value add is going to be and why you should invest in this resource. I think having the experience of been at several different pharma companies and that being part of the reason I was integrated into this team, that I was really able to build on my learnings from those experiences and really inform management of what works and doesn't work, and giving real world examples and showing how the data is not in any sort of form that can be easily accessed by someone who doesn't understand it. Because if I leave or one of the members of my team leaves, it really becomes very, very difficult to understand what's going on. You have different batches of data, different assays, and once the magnitude of the problem really becomes clear, because being the person who is most proximal to it, I understand it very well. Management says, why do we need to spend this money? We're getting the figures we want. And the real sell is that, one, we can have our data in a much more organized fashion in case we move on to other team members, or if there's any sort of shift in management of the company. And two, it's much more efficient as far as a data analysis perspective, that we can generate these plots in real time. When you ask me what's going on with all the patients in phase 2, Pembro combination with CPS 20 or above, I can do that in a few minutes, whereas it might take me a week to do it if I don't have a real integrated data management tool.
Thank you. And Zitong, can you speak a little bit about the infrastructure tools that NextGen Jane has invested in or thinking about investing in to resolve some of your data management challenges?
Yeah, sure. And actually, the challenges we are facing is pretty much very similar to what Chris just mentioned. Almost all these challenges, we are facing similar things as well. And for us, is basically, as I mentioned, is basically we have even more two very diverse type of data type. So in order to integrate all this data and make them to work smoothly, so it's our infrastructure. We call it basically database anchor through in-house one. Basically is this way is basically we get all the RNA-seq data from the super large computing output, which typical is actually from the Elucidata Poly platform. Once that's done, we work with them to get all the data standardized in the standard format, passed in, and internally we do much of the data processing, post sequencing data processing through R and Python, some other data analytics too. But once that's done, is everything we straight into a database, relational database. From there is also our intention is to integrate it together with a clinical information, which is very diverse and broad. which currently we are trying to get some CDMS tool to handle all this data, then integrated with our relational database. That's basically the infrastructure we are building. And actually for this integration with in-house database, we think a Linux server and put most of the API commands to the RNA-seq to the CDMS, which actually we also working with Elucidate, try to help us to build this integration center server here.
Thank you so much. I also had another question. When you think of actually implementing a solution or an infrastructure to manage and utilize this data, I know both of you have been part of smaller companies in the early phases. When do you think, what is a good time to actually start investing in it? And how do you actually, what is your advice, I guess, to R&D leaders on, when is a good time and how do you actually make the case for investing in these solutions, right? Could you both touch upon that?
Sure. So go ahead, please, Tom.
Yeah, go ahead. After you.
Sure. So I think as early as possible would be my answer to that question. It's never too early because all of the members of the team, once you have a workflow in place, the more quickly you do that from the preclinical level. And as Zitong's saying it, he has data that he's now currently trying to integrate with his clinical data, right? And I'm coming in even later and saying we have all these different data types from our clinical assays. It would be wonderful if a company was, and I've never seen this happen, I've worked at 5 different small companies at this point, to have all of your preclinical data, your pre-IND data, everything in your IND, being able to really drill down into what your clinical data means, how does it relate to your preclinical data, what type of conclusions can you make based on what you found. And it's, this touches on another question that you asked earlier, which is, how do you make the case to management for this investment? It's difficult to do early because everything's racing, the pace is very fast, people are making decisions in real time, no one wants to be trained on a new system. Sometimes there's some pushback and of course the money. But after seeing this process play out in several different environments through preclinical, pre-IND, IND, and early phase 1-2, I can, if it were up to me, if I was to be the chief officer at a company for that was just starting out, I would really like to see what it would be to make that investment early on, because all it creates is headaches later. If you don't take the time and invest early on, it's going to come back to you, as I said, with these shared drives that have fragmented data, they're disorganized, it's difficult. If you have a question about something that was done years ago, it's nearly impossible to answer that because turnover is pretty high at these small companies. So having something that's consistent and is something that's really built into the fiber of the company, rather than just a piecemeal solution, it would really, I think, it would really maximize the return on investment in that you would spend this time and money up front, but be able to answer these questions more efficiently as the company grows in the portfolio.
Thank you. Zitong, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Chris. It's basically doing this as early as possible. Actually, it should be the very beginning to have a plan to build this infrastructure in place. And each individual component you might put off later. For us, let's say is a CDMS. Since we are getting to clinical, might be later after R&D. We may think about individual software might be later, but the infrastructure and the framework should be done in the very beginning and as early as possible. And one of the key things in the early basically infrastructure implementation is basically we focus on the standardization, especially for our 2 type of diverse data. Is basically what are the standards coming from each individual module each individual package from the whole pipeline, which will be feed into the final integration server. So from that point of view, is basically this is a part of the reason we use centralized the relational database as sort of the anchor for management is standardization and as anchor to integrate all this information together.
Okay, thank you. I also had another question. I know, both of you touched upon it, that it's critical, but it could be a challenge to actually make the case to start investing early, given that, you might be at a smaller biotech, uncertainty about funding and challenges, etc. I also think, my question to you is, has that changed over the years? Like, you have been, both of you have been associated with a lot of smaller biotechs and even larger companies for the last few years. And I wanted to understand, has that changed over the different companies and the years that people are now thinking more early about data management? Or, what are your thoughts around that? And has it, and given that there are a lot of tools, infrastructure out there, has it become more challenged to actually find out a solution that works for you, or is it, easier? I just wanted to understand your thoughts on that too.
You want to take it, Zitong?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I think, I'd like to think biotech is a somewhat iterative process. You see a lot of the companies, especially in the Cambridge area where I work, there are so many biotechs, and they really try to understand each other from an HR perspective, a compensation perspective, right, a management scheme. And I think this is a similar process in that as people come from other companies, if you're just out of academia and starting a new company, but it's always the case that people with industry experience are brought in because they're able to guide the research and make the decisions that need to be made in order to be a successful company. And people like myself and Zitong, who have the experience of being at other companies and really being able to speak the language of others who've been at companies. And even though it's not the most salient thing on their mind, and they might think, oh, why do we have to invest 100, 200K in this right now? They've seen how it goes. They've seen how things progress from preclinical, as I said, to IND and clinical, when you really get into having to deal with much larger data sets that are security issues and these types of things. So I do think there's more of an acknowledgement that there's a problem out there, as people have seen the consequences of not planning earlier. As I said, as the business becomes more mature, as people get more experience, I think it's easier. I would have had more difficulty making the case to move with someone like Elucidata at earlier companies. Part of that was my own inexperience with these issues, and part of that is other people didn't really have this. And now you can see that there's a real need for this and the real value of investing early in something like this. As to there's always, as to who you select as your vendor. Reputation is important. What colleagues have used in the past, word of mouth, and of course the technical abilities that they bring to bear, from the team. So I think there's two pieces to that: understanding what the needs are and more people being cognizant of that, and secondly, the companies who are servicing these needs understanding more what the challenges are and being able to speak the language a little bit better and realize this is what small biotechs need. This is where you are in your development. You're a preclinical company trying to prepare for your first IND, or you're a more mature company dealing with electronic data capture and a lot of clinical data. I think both of those things have matured over the past, especially 5 years, as processing power has gotten more effective, and there are more vendors, of course. So all of them have evolved with time, I think, in a positive way.
Thank you. I think we are almost up to the half an hour, and I see we have actually a really good question on the chat. I think it says, if you were a C-level and starting a new company from scratch, what foundational components or essential technical frameworks would you start with? I think this is, Chris or Zitong, if you want to take this.
Yeah, it's a for startup nowadays. There is so many technologies and tools available around, which is not available like 5 or even 10 years ago. But nowadays, it's lots of things are around. So I would focus on basically essentially a standardized package on Linux. This is plus some relational database. Basically, once you get this on, generally this gives you a good start to handle most of the diverse data facing for bioinformatics or for most of the analytical data challenges.
Thank you. Chris, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think Zitong's coming from a more programming perspective as the more information technology expert at the company. I'm much more of a scientist and clinical scientist. I spent a long time at the bench, and Linux and programming, Python, these are things I have a little bit of experience with. But when a lot of people, when they hear this, it sounds overwhelming, right? Oh, how am I going to program this architecture myself? I think from the start, if you are lucky enough to have someone like Zitong who can speak to the very technical nitty-gritty and then translate that to management in a way that's palatable. A lot of companies don't have the benefit of that, and I think this is exactly where a company like Elucidata comes in, insofar as they're able to take on the heavy lift of these relational databases in a way that, and for Zitong, it's more of having a partner in this process. For me, it's having a vendor who's going to service the needs, where I can speak in plain text in English and say, this is what I need, and have someone make that reality on the Poly platform. So, it's two different perspectives, but I believe it's ultimately the same issue and the same resolution.
I really can't thank you all enough for taking the time for speaking to this. Chris, it's so exciting to hear you talk about the work we did. For those of you who don't know, Chris and I had the opportunity to work together when we were first setting up Hukipa's data management platform. So really it hits home, and I love to see that work that we put in really coming to fruition, and I'm very excited for the next steps there. Again, thank you all for spending your time. And again, if there's any other questions or comments, you can email us directly at info@elucidata.io. Again, in the questions in the chat, we're going to be sending out the recordings from these sessions in the next couple of days. So stay tuned there. And I guess with that, I want to, I know it's late for our team over in India, and I really want to just one more time extend a big thank you to everyone who put work into this. A lot of work went behind the scenes to get these presentations ready. Our fantastic speakers and panelists for all their contributions, and our hosts, Vlad and Nichelle, for moderating these panelists or these sessions. That's a wrap on DataFAIR 2023. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you again next time.